Então, bom dia a todas e a todos aqui presentes. Teremos então a palestra agora da professora Shirley Tate, mas antes de passar a palavra a ela e fazer a devida apresentação, eu gostaria de aproveitar esses 2 minutos aqui, que é o momento suficiente para vocês sentarem, para anunciar alguns livros que estão ali no hall do departamento. Alguns colegas que estão aqui presentes trouxeram alguns livros que eles publicaram recentemente. Tá? Então, o professor Walter Silvério acho que trouxe poucos exemplares do livro dele. Temos agora somente o volume 1 do livro Relações Étnico-Raciais, um percurso para educadores. Tá? É um livro organizado por ele, pela Érica Aparecida Mattioli e pela Thaís Fernanda Leite Madeira. Outro que trouxe poucos exemplares do livro foi o professor Osmundo. Toda a cota que você trouxe de 2, 3 livros está esgotada. Estudou rapidamente. O professor Breit, né, trouxe aqui a tese dele, que foi publicada em livro, intitulado Na Quebrada, a parceria é mais forte. Né, jovens, vínculos afetivos e reconhecimento na periferia. Mistura a pesquisa dele sobre hip hop, né, na Ceilândia. Chegou mais um aqui, que é da Givânia Maria da Silva, que é um livro sobre o quilombo Conceição das Crioulas, educação e luta política no quilombo de Conceição das Crioulas, que fica em Pernambuco, não é isso? Isso. Givânia é também uma quilombola intelectual, que está aqui conosco. Tula, mais uma equipe aqui de pessoas, entre elas a Ana Flauzina, que era professora aqui do Direito até recentemente, agora está lá trabalhando com o Osmundo na Federal do Recôncavo Baiano. Isso é um grande ganho para a Recôncavo do Baiano. Organizaram o livro Discursos Negros, Legislação Penal, Política Criminal e Racismo. Sérgio São Bernardo acabou de chegar da Bahia e escreveu um livro, Xangô e Tênis, Estudos sobre Filosofia, Direito e Racismo. Bruna, que apresentou ontem, Bruna Cristina Pereira, Tramas e Dramas de Gênero e de Cor, a violência doméstica contra mulheres negras. Okay? E por fim, minha tese de doutorado, publicada em livros Saberes Subalternos e Decolonialidade, o Sindicato das Trabalhadoras Domésticas no Brasil. Então, enfim, aproveitem de poucos exemplares, todos ali no hall de entrada do prédio. Pois bem, então, vamos começar aqui a nossa atividade com a professora Shirley Tate. Antes de mais nada, eu acho que é uma satisfação, uma alegria, uma honra ter a sua presença aqui conosco. Né? A professora Shirley é professora da Universidade de Leeds, na Inglaterra. Atualmente é também professora visitante pesquisadora do Instituto de Reconciliação e Justiça Social da Free State University, na África do Sul. E na Universidade de Leeds ela atua como a diretora do Centro de Estudos em Etnicidade e Racismo, né, da Escola de Sociologia e Política Social daquela universidade. Suas áreas de interesse são estudos da diáspora negra, racismo institucional, corpo, afeto, beleza, estudos decoloniais caribenhos, interseccionalidade de raça e gênero. Né? Ela tem uma longa lista de publicação, separei aqui apenas alguns livros. Né? Então, em 2005, ela publicou o livro Black Skins, Black Masks, né? Pele Negra, Máscaras Negras. Né? hibridismo, dialogismo e performatividade. Tá? Isso está em inglês, o título da obra. Em 2009, publicou a Beleza Negra, Estética, Estilização e Política. E mais recentemente, no ano passado, O Corpo das Mulheres Negras e a Nação, Raça, Gênero e Cultura. E, além desses 3 livros autorais dela, ela tem mais 2 livros co-organizados. Né? Um com o Ian Law, chamado Racismos no Caribe, Conexões e Complexidades, Conexões e Complexidades na racialização, no processo de racialização na região do Caribe. E também com uma outra publicação com a Encarnação Gutierrez Rodrigues, a Europa Criolizada, Legados e Transformações. Enfim, então, como eu disse anteriormente, eu acho que é uma honra ter a professora Shirley Tate aqui, então passo a palavra a ela. Obrigado.
Thank you, Joaze, for such a wonderful introduction, and also for inviting me to speak here. Those of you who need one of these, please get one, because I might look Brazilian but I can't speak Portuguese. Okay, so please get one now before I start. Okay, so this paper emerged out of several lifetimes of being an academic in the United Kingdom. And it seemed to me that there was a point at which I just had to speak about anger. Nelson yesterday, in his excellent talk, put love and anger together. And I like that a lot. Because for me, what was important in writing this particular paper was to do something very specific in terms of the decolonial project. And that was to decolonize a stereotype within which we as black women are embedded in the United Kingdom. And that stereotype is the angry black woman. Do you have that in Brazil? Are we all angry in Brazil too? It seems to be everywhere. It's really interesting, isn't it? Since I'm one of the most passive people you've ever seen, anger takes a long time to ignite in my heart. But when it gets there, it's really there. You know what I mean, right? I won't go into any more detail. So I want to begin with a story about myself. And you might think to yourself, why is she doing that? I don't want to know anything about her. But this is me using autoethnography to begin to introduce my topic of why I'm so angry. So I want to start with an incident that happened very early on in my academic career. I've been an academic now for 30 odd years in the UK. I was a member of a 2-person team teaching on youth and community work, a degree in youth and community work in a university in the UK. The person who was the head of the 2-person team at the time said we need to expand the staffing, so we need a 3rd person. Great, no problem with that. The process, however, became very problematic when we had 2 applications, one from a man, an Asian man, and in the UK we say Asian to mean people from the Indian subcontinent or from Pakistan, Bangladesh, right? And an Indian man applied for that job, and her white feminist friend also applied for the job. We were discussing the candidates in a meeting one day, and I said to her, I thought the man was a very strong candidate on paper because of his experiences, his qualifications, the sorts of things he'd done in terms of community development work within the black community around anti-racist politics. So for me, he was the better candidate. She looked at me and she said, now Shirley. Whenever anybody says, now Shirley, you know you're in trouble, right? Now Shirley, what are you today. Are you a woman? That is, are you a feminist or are you black? Now, that kind of a question is also a very problematic one for me and for many of you here, because you could see the kind of strange kind of question that was, right, immediately. And I kind of looked at her, and you could see the question mark on my face. And then she said, because you know, the point is that our program should not bear the brunt of employing black people in this university. She's talking to a black woman, bearing the brunt. I don't know how you translate that into Portuguese, but it's not a very nice thing to say to anybody. And I'm not a brunt. Anyway, the short the short kind of get to the end of the story is that the man who wasn't appointed, because he wasn't appointed, didn't get the job, he complained, he took the university to an industrial tribunal, he won at the tribunal on the basis of racial discrimination. I was his witness to say what had happened in that place and in that conversation. After that, the woman who told me I was some brunt went around crying for months. She was forgiven by all of her white colleagues of all of the racism that she'd actually, caused. I was investigated by the Vice Chancellor of the university. I was taken off that course and I was put in a room by myself for 2 years without any windows to protect me from further victimization. And of course I had to leave because I was being victimized by being put into a room. So that is just one really early incident that happened to me during my career, and there have been many others since. So, as I said at the beginning, my anger is slow to build, but I'm at the point now in which, as you can see on that slide, I'm just saying me vex. But when I say me vex, I'm going back to my Jamaican roots. To say me vex in Jamaica is really to say I am absolutely furious. Yo tengo una rabia tremenda, right? That's me at the moment. I can speak some Spanish because of my Jamaican upbringing. Okay. So let me begin by also going back to my Jamaican heritage in terms of looking at the writings of someone who I think is one of our foremost scholars in Jamaica. So this is from Sylvia Wynter. She was given the Order of Jamaica for her work as a feminist philosopher and cultural theorist. She says, you cannot solve the issue of consciousness in terms of their body of knowledge. You just can't. Just as within the medieval order of knowledge, there was no way in which you could explain why it is that certain planets seem to be moving backwards. Because you were coming from a geocentric model, right? So you had to know the world in that way. Whereas from a man-centric model, we cannot solve consciousness because man is a purely ontogenetic, purely biological conception of being who then creates culture. So if we say consciousness is constructed, who does the constructing? You see? Who constructs consciousness? That's a really important place to start, I think, in our decolonial project, as Nelson really aptly said yesterday. So I want to look at the issue highlighted by Wynter here of who constructs consciousness, who constructs culture, and how it is that we still struggle within feminism over the construction of black women's consciousness, as well as our cultural construction as the angry black woman who is inherently defensive. I want to begin with personal pain, which I've already started with because I'm sure you could hear me getting a bit angry as I was talking to you. I want to begin with personal pain to start this exploration and to build out from that to see how black feminism enables us to construct other sorts of consciousness, other sorts of cultures in which anger, pain, become part of the necessary analytical tools in terms of the project of decolonizing white feminist, anti-black woman knowledge and practice. So I want to share something else with you, a moment of weakness, my confession of vulnerability. I go back here to the etymology of vulnerability, which in late Latin is about being capable or susceptible to being wounded or hurt by a weapon, or being open to moral attack or criticism. So in my confession, I'm also making myself vulnerable to your judgment of me. So bear that in mind. So here is my moment of imperfection revealed. I grind my teeth. I grind my teeth so much that they hurt. According to my dentist, that is because the ligaments in my teeth never get a chance to rest. So now I wear a soft gum shield at night for protection. It's not very pretty. I need to protect my body from being attacked by itself, by myself. This speaks a daily estrangement from myself in white feminist institutional spaces of alienation and psychic pain. However, pain emerges, and I use it here as an analytic frame to explore how as black women we cope with an imposed silencing from within white feminism whilst maintaining subjective cohesiveness. As both repressive and productive of black feminist critique in spaces of estrangement such as UK universities, psychic institutional pain can also be agentic when we notice, like Audre Lorde, that it is rooted in anger. This paper recognizes the source of black feminist anger. Slower. Yeah, it's okay. Am I speaking slow for you or for the translator? Yeah. Okay, I'll go really slowly. Okay. This paper recognizes the source of black feminist anger and repeats it as complaint and need for feminist action in order to continue to build black feminist community. Right. So I can do it. Oh, it's okay. Because I know when she's got to the end. So I'm going to talk. It's fine. Yeah. I'm going to talk first of all about psychic institutional pain and alienation. Then I'm going to move to look at how we go from complaint to action. And last, I'm going to talk about Audre Lorde's idea on the erotic as a position from which action can start.
Ela está falando a respeito de Audre Lorde, tá?
Yeah.
Ela não pegou a tradução.
Oh, okay. It might take me longer than an hour. Okay. Yeah, I know. I thought I should have given her a copy before. Anyway. Okay, so the bit that I'm going to do now. I didn't understand what did you say? I didn't get it. Okay. So the bit I'm going to do now is psychic institutional pain and alienation. Okay. So there is a physical location to the pain I get from the institution. It's transferred to my teeth. My teeth feel terror, unhappiness, loneliness, and dread. As my heart refuses to cope, for fear it will burst open. This is a physical location within my body of estrangement, alienation, and being set apart, caused by white feminist racism and its exclusions. Being set apart is about physical exclusion and intellectual exclusion. As we know as Black feminist liberation thought continues to be marginalized within the feminist canon. There's also exclusion of myself, my body, from white feminist conviviality in UK universities. I don't grind my teeth because I was born a teeth grinder, but because I have been made into one. I have been made into one because of anger. The anger that I feel working in white institutions in the face of racism. There's a pain that I have in terms of my teeth. It's around gritting my teeth so hard that my jaw hurts as I experience personal silencing, but also political and epistemological silencing as well. There's also solitude, being absolutely alone in feeling and knowing that racism has occurred. So another confession is that my anger burns really hard and really deep. And I freely admit I've carried it with me for years. It is reignited when new injustices emerge to remind me that there's no such thing as tolerance. And if tolerance did exist, it would be based on me being tolerated by a whiteness which ignores that it is intolerable. So I exist within institutions in which my thoughts have been stolen, my body vilified, my presence only heard through the voice of the angry black woman, a woman who can't help but be defensive. To quote Sharon Patricia Holland, there is an erotic life of racism in institutions which denies the possibility of feminist community. The pain produced by white feminist racist exclusion enables me to move away from so-called feminist sisterhood. This happens, to quote Elaine Scarry, because pain is about an experience of negation. It's an immediate rendering of against, of something being against one, and of something one must be against. To become myself as a black woman, I must refuse institutional negation and the pain that's attached to that. To rid myself of this pain is itself freeing, because it roots me elsewhere, and elsewhere with a background. This is an elsewhere not dependent on what Glisson calls the one of the West. Refusing white feminist-induced pain is necessary for personal freedom. If I experience racism as that which causes me pain and produces anger, because of its absolute lack of safety and no possibility of feminist community, I will be against that as much as it is against me. I will see it as not me, as abject. I will eject it from myself. So going back to my Jamaican roots and saying me vex enables me to get rid of this pain, because it returns me to who I am. Me vex returns me, that's really good pronunciation, great. Returns me to black feminist community, to Caribbean feminist thought, to Marcus Garvey's black nationalism, to Frantz Fanon's decolonization of the colonial psyche, to Walter Rodney's Black Power, to the Jamaican Maroon chieftainess, Nanny, who fought against British colonialism and enslavement. I need to go back to myself, because it seems to me that white feminism, boundaries of my experience within a UK internal racial colony, which lives on in universities, in white feminist knowledge and white curricula, in which black feminist thought is present for 1 week's teaching, if it is present at all. My gum shield has been very instructive. It has taught me that anger should not be ignored. And you know, we're brought up in a way not to show anger. It's seen as to lack civility, to lack good manners, you know, to not be able to cope with discussions and not to be able to cope with differences. So my anger should not be ignored. Instead, I should say, me vex, and take up Lord's scholarship on anger and pain as transformative forces in and against white feminist sisterhood and heteronormative patriarchy. I want to look at Toni Morrison first, for a specific reason, because she's somebody who taught me how to look as a black feminist. And then I want to also look at Audre Lorde's work in order to break the silencing of my anger, to allow me to begin the first part of political action through anger, which is to voice a complaint against racist white feminist practice. Okay, so the next section is called From Complaint to Action. A little bit faster. Okay. Okay, brilliant. Otherwise, yeah, we'll be here all day. Okay, so the next section is From Complaint to Action. When I first read Playing in the Dark, all those many years ago, I felt supported in my view that race and whiteness are themes in writing, even when they're not mentioned. Toni Morrison's work still makes sense to me in the 21st century because of its resonance with my thinking on race. As a Jamaican immigrant to the UK, the foundations of this thinking are influenced by Fanon's work in Black Skins, Black Masks on the Colonial Psyche, by Rastafarianism, also by a Jamaican nationalism that was about bringing a nation to life out of plurality and mixedness as a post-independent state. Walter Rodney's Black Power has also been powerful in my formation, as of course has Black feminist thought, and by Black feminist thought I also include Caribbean feminist thought within that. While these for me were about thinking about the colonial condition and building toward a Black Atlantic diasporic political, social and cultural future, Morrison's work was crucially about how, as a Black feminist academic, it is important to look in order to develop Black anti-racist feminist critique in conditions of unfreedom. And we know that we still have conditions of unfreedom here in Brazil, for Black people in the United States, in the UK, in the Caribbean as well. We continue to exist in conditions of unfreedom. Morrison outlined her project as very particular. She saw it as an effort to change the critical gaze from the racial object to the racial subject, from the described and imagined to the describers and imaginers, from the serving to the served. So for her, it was, if you want to put it in another way, it was about, where's Nelson? He's right there. It was about reversing the kind of geographies of reason, right? That's what she was talking about. This critical gaze reveals whiteness as itself racialized, something that's not very often talked about by white academics. This meant that former certainties within feminist sisterhood had to be given up for critical examination and transformation. It also meant putting knowledge generated by Black women at the forefront of scholarship, making us subjects who describe, imagine, and are served. Playing in the Dark presented me with a particular task as a Black feminist. First of all, I had to decenter whiteness as subject, process, structure, psyche, and sociality, and look at Blackness and whiteness in order to see who this racial subject could be. This time, though, I did that work from the very critical lens given to me by Morrison. rather than one just solely based on excavating black women's experience and knowledge and bringing these to light, though nothing is wrong with doing that as well. I was really much more interested in how black women as subjects describe, imagine and position themselves in those post-race societies in which race still matters. This is so as it seemed that much had to be said about how it is that racial objects become raced, gendered and sexualized subjects through black feminist politics, racialized gender imaginaries and everyday performativities. Of course, we should also be interested in how we imagine and describe black Atlantic diasporic womanhood as community, as affect, and as skin. How such community can also itself be inclusive or exclusionary, as well as how it is that we continue to position ourselves as black within a proliferation of difference. I've always paid attention to what Morrison said. She warns about replacing dominant Eurocentric scholarship and discourses with dominant Afrocentrism. And I've always paid attention to what she says about how we get out of that particular bind. I think I've got Morrison somewhere. Yeah. That's the one. Yes. She says, I do not want to encourage those totalizing approaches to African American scholarship which have no drive other than the exchange of dominations, dominant Eurocentric scholarship replaced by dominant Afrocentric scholarship. That for her is not the political project. More interesting is what makes intellectual domination possible. That I still find extremely relevant. How knowledge is transformed from invasion and conquest to revelation and choice. What ignites and informs literary imagination and what forces help establish the parameters of criticism. She's talking there about how you decolonize knowledge, right? Part of what Nelson also said yesterday. With these words, she clearly sets out the challenge for black feminist scholarship, black feminist intersectional scholarship, as being to look at power relations in the academy, in publishing, and the public sphere, which determine what counts as knowledge worthy of dissemination and citation. She also shows that even knowledge linked to what she calls invasion and conquest can be used in black feminist criticism to produce new meanings. So one should not necessarily start from the established white feminist canon, but should excavate and bring subjugated knowledge to light. The perspective of critique, including self-critique, is significant in black feminist politics, as it should be a perspective that seeks to counter dominant white racialized gender narratives. This has been the academic task laid down by her work for me, which means that whether we are readers or writers, as critics, we must not remain, as she says, too polite or too fearful to notice a disrupting darkness before our eyes. As critics, it's too easy to turn away from noticing disruptions of the taken for granted when fear silences us. And as academics, we exist within contexts in which fear is a very powerful affect. We feel fear of being wrong. We also feel fear of being outsiders, whether that's intellectually or socially. We also feel fear of being ridiculed. We feel fear of not being seen as not political or conscious enough as black women. We're also afraid of being seen as the angry black woman. We also feel fear of being seen as people who are resistant to change. Fear is an immobilizing affect, but one that has to be dealt with if we are to think a black feminism that recognizes and gives a place to difference. Differences of class, sexuality, mixedness, gender, age, ability, and location, for example. We must get over fear to explore how it is that we can still maintain black feminist politics as a point of identification, mutual recognition, and respect within and through difference. Morrison also asks another question, which I'd like to turn to briefly here. She says, what happens to the writerly imagination of a black author who is at some level always conscious of representing one's own race too, or in spite of a race of readers that understands itself to be universal or race-free? As black academics, this is something that we have to think about as we write. Who is our audience? Who reads our work? And what do they make of it? And then use it or misuse it. Okay? That's what she's talking about here. Her question is really important, given the placement of writing from black women and women of color within the women's and gender studies canon as representing only a race point of view. This race point of view is seen as all that black women or women of color are capable of giving to the academy. The work of black women and women of color in the academy, therefore, still continues to be faced with the double burden of tokenism and representing the race. What would be different if the women's and gender studies community saw itself as race and racializing? This is not a new question, but maybe it now demands a newer answer based on a decolonizing imperative which stresses a disidentification with dominant knowledge and a giving up of our most cherished categories for critique. Black feminists have already insisted on this decolonizing imperative, and they've also turned their critical gaze on blackness itself. In this endeavor, they've built on Morrison's question to ask this particular question. What happens to the writerly imagination of a black author who is at some level always conscious of representing one's own identifications and politics too, or in spite of readers who consider themselves to be political and cultural guardians of authentic universal blackness? So we have, a problem on both fronts, representing ourselves to whiteness, but also representing ourselves to cultural guardians of authentic universal blackness. I hope there's nobody like that in the room. Both of these, one from Morrison and the other drawing from her, must be inseparable for black feminists. They are inseparable because they add a different nuance to the work that is done in the moment of writing that Morrison rightly sees as a moment of becoming. That is specifically the moment of positioning oneself as, through writing, which means that we've had to rid ourselves of the politics of fear of black ostracism and the necessity for politeness to whiteness in order to theorize in ways that we find meaningful. Of course, we're really helped in this endeavor by the data that we get from our black respondents, who engage with things like the intersections of blackness, mixedness, gender, class, age, being able-bodied or not, and sexuality, in ways that are sometimes overlooked because they're too challenging for the white taking for granted of what blackness should be. I'm going to cut a little bit out so I don't run out of time, and just go to another part. Yeah? 10 minutes. Okay. All right. Okay. So I'll just go to uses of anger and try and say something about Audre Lorde. So uses of anger, channeling the erotic. In the cancer journals, Audre Lorde sees herself as a warrior in her response to the pain of cancer. She died from cancer, as you know, and speaks out against the silence that pain and illness can produce when compounded by racism and sexism. Her cancer makes her aware of her body as an object of its raced and gendered flesh. She sees herself, as it were, from a distance, as other, because of the pain she endures. In the Cancer Journal, Lorde's first chapter is the transformation of silence into language and action. Here she writes about the activism initiated by her breast cancer diagnosis. She says that words are a source of power to combat the lack of agency of a woman with cancer and the lack of agency of a black woman in US America. She reflects on the removal of her right breast in terms of feminism, corporeality, and pain. She also talks about the loss of a sensual area of her body for connecting to other women and experience her lesbian sexuality. But she sees herself as plural. She sees herself as a plural subject rather than one defined solely by the pain of her cancer. It is this plurality which is significant for me, because often as black women we are seen as solely defined by race and have no life outside of that worth noting, worth attending to or theorizing about. As Lewis Gordon would say, we're still just an outside, a surface with no inner life worth speaking of. However, Lorde insists on our plurality, a plurality in which I cannot be known only as and through the skin I inhabit. So Lorde speaks against suffering and self-negation. And speaking against suffering and self-negation means that she talks about responsibility, selfhood, and feeling. So the erotic for her is about reinforcing subjectivity, but it's also about the formation of community, because the erotic exceeds the intersubjective space because of affect. So within this intersubjective space, what we would get is a displacement of strategic essentialism as the basis of identity. And it would open up other political possibilities through the construction of communities of mutual relationality bonded by affect. Lorde says that her initial reaction to racist and sexual injustice is anger. She understands that while anger is active, it can also be a divisive force in the community. So we must continue to build solidarity politics because these are vital for the survival of black feminist community. She steps away from anger, in fact. She steps away from anger to action, as we can see an example in her writing Eye to Eye. She speaks here in Eye to Eye about the need for empowerment and feeling in order for a new community to form which bonds women together to repair the damage of patriarchy and racism and to develop new ways of being beyond those systems which oppress black women. She speaks, I feel, about the emergence of agency, political black feminist agency, through anger and pain. So to conclude, for Lorde, pain is something sharp and something distinct. And she makes a distinction between pain and suffering because she says that suffering exists as an inescapable cycle. Lewis Gordon also talks about suffering. He talks about suffering as the basis of black liberation thought in Caribbean and Africana philosophy. White feminist investigation of black women suffering from racism, and the black feminist subject as the angry black woman, is always something that precedes us as we enter institutions. It's something within we exist in social life. And what's interesting about the angry black woman is that the bodies of white feminists feel us. So we come into being without any need for questioning on their part, without any need for them to feel guilty at their racist assumptions, or for any need for them to feel shame at their own racism. They feel our anger, they say. But what's interesting about how they feel our anger is that they feel this with eager expectancy, because it's always the fault of that black woman over there, of me, and her or my unending suffering because of a racism which they say cannot be found in white psyches, white societal structures, white knowledges, white institutions, or white relationalities, but an anger which they say is firmly located in that chip on my shoulder, that chip on our shoulder, and that is where our anger emerges from. It's our fault, in other words, not a reaction to white racism. However, as we name anger and the location from which it emerges as not us and not from us, we produce a becoming rather than the white fixity as object with which we've always been named. We reject the angry black woman. Naming pain combined with anger allows for agency, action, and solidarity. Naming pain through anger, I seek to alienate myself from the centuries-old enslavement-inspired suffering of the angry black woman within which I'm encased in white UK universities. As I make myself strange from her through the pain of my teeth grinding, I become the other of that particular enslavement stroke colonial stereotype. I become unrecognizable, much as was the case for Gayatri Spivak's subaltern subject. I occupy a space of marginality, that one that Bell Hooks talks about. I'm angry, I hurt, I'm in pain, but I use this to remake myself as I always knew I was. I engage in my remaking without the need for the gaze of recognition, friendship, solidarity, love, attention, or regard from white racist feminists. I'm no longer surrounded by the mask of the angry black woman, but begin to show me, Shirley, in my wholeness, in my solitude, but nonetheless in my uniqueness as someone with a background, a past, and a future.